Hi, I'm Eric B. Welcome to the 7 Days of Satch presented to you by Chevron. This presentation with Ricky Riccardi and Maxine Gordon is produced by French Quarter Festival, Inc. Special thanks to all partners and sponsors, including Chevron, New Orleans Jazz National Historical Park, GE, Jack Daniels, Abita Brewing Company, WWL-TV Channel 4, New Orleans Jazz Museum, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate, and NOLA.com, WWOZ 90.7 FM, and Offbeat Magazine. 2020 marks the 20th anniversary of Satchmo SummerFest, dedicated to the life and legacy in the music of New Orleans' own Louis Satchmo Armstrong. This year, we cannot be live with you, so we've joined forces with a few of our partners to produce a multi-platform celebration in honor of Satch. Coming up next, Ricky Riccardi, author and director of research collections at the Louis Armstrong House Museum, discuss his new book, Heart Full of Rhythms, The Big Band Years of Louis Armstrong, and an interview with the author, archivist, and cultural historian, Maxine Gordon.
This is Ricky Riccardi here in Toms River, New Jersey. I really wish I was in New Orleans right now for Satchmo SummerFest, but we'll be back next year, that's for sure. But we're still doing the best we can to get the word out about Pops and his legacy and everything else. And today I am joined by one of the all-time greats, the author of, I think, maybe the best jazz biography in this century, the great Maxine Gordon. Hello, Maxine. How are you?
Hi, Ricky.
Have you been holding up?
Well, we've adjusted to be virtual. I miss New Orleans. I miss Satchmo Fest. I miss you. I miss the archive. We miss our life. But, the main thing is that we're healthy. The people we love are healthy. We don't want anybody to suffer and die. So we're just, we do the best we can. And in the name of Louis Armstrong, we just keep putting one foot in front of the other. Right?
That's all we can do. That's all we can do. The good folks at Satchmo SummerFest asked if I would put together something about my upcoming book, which is called Heart Full of Rhythm, The Big Band Years of Louis Armstrong. It looks like it'll be out September 1st. And I could have just sat here and just talked to myself for a while. But as I mentioned, Maxine is an incredible biographer, researcher, historian, critic, producer, you name it. And I wanted to have her as part of this as well, because she's been a big influence on me, and she has also read an advanced copy. And I thought we could have a nice conversation, biographer to biographer, and talk about this. So thank you, Maxine, for putting the time in and for all your support over the years.
Well, thank you for inviting me. This was our idea at Satchmo Fest. We were going to have a conversation and answer questions. So we love it there, but we have so many great memories together.
The best.
But, so we're going to have our discussion about this great book. I just want everybody to know, order the book, buy the book, independent bookstore. There's a great one in New Orleans. If otherwise, we might have to go Amazon, but this book fills in a totally empty space in the history of Louis Armstrong, which you say, but it's true. People always look at him in the early, half 5, half 7, and then what you did was go to the later years that filled in that, right? But nobody looked at these great years starting in 29. And so I thank you for the work. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have some questions. I wanted to ask you, it's in your prologue, but for people who haven't read the book, I've read the book. The book is so great. It's so readable. It's so well written. And it has so much information from the archive. The photos are great. Ricky, I love Ricky. He's it. It's it for me. I could never have written my book without him. And so I know what it takes. But could you talk about what you talk about in the prologue, what you say bigger than jazz?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, I mean, I think we both come from a jazz background. I have my master's in jazz history and research, and you know, I'm a half-assed jazz musician myself. But when I was coming up in this world and reading so much about Armstrong, it was really, I noticed the jazz critics and even some of the jazz musicians, and especially the jazz educators, they were the ones who were always trying to push Louis in this box. So, you know, he hit his peak in 1928, and he should have just stuck in that mold for the rest of his career. That's when he was an innovator, a trailblazer, and, you know, why did he have to sell out and go commercial? And what I realized, it took me a while, is that, you know, I would read sometimes the polls in these magazines, Downbeat and Jazz Times, and the critics' polls would never give Louis anything, but he would still, even in the 21st century, win the readers' polls, you know, reissues and everything. So that's when I realized, wait a minute, you know, the jazz world is a beautiful community, but a small and sometimes, you know, single-minded community. And Louis was playing for the masses. And so what I realized was 1928 is like this, you know, line of demarcation. His career, you know, either ends there or starts there, depending on how you view it. And to me, I view it as the beginning. I view it as 1929. It's like, you know what? I'm going to take on the pop world, the white pop world. I'm going to add something that's never been heard before, you know, my completely black sensibility, swing, scat, the whole thing, and turn everything on its head. And what he does with his music and showing up in movies and breaking down barriers on the radio and going overseas, I think he's really the first pop star. And so the jazz world, who's shaking their fist at him for making movies in the 30s and recording love songs, they're missing the picture. You know, they're missing the picture that this guy took the seeds of jazz and made it into, you know, basically everything we've heard for the last 90 years.
Right. Right. But what is very interesting, the way you take on the so-called jazz critics they're self-proclaimed. And in this period, in the early period, excuse me, the white jazz critics were they were either wrote music or played music, like Leonard Feather. I mean, you know, you call a name, let's call a name. You know, it's like Dexter said, if, you know, he would get you a record deal if you would record his tune, which you mentioned, right?
Yep.
And Dexter said they were the worst tunes he ever heard in his life. And so he once, talked about Dexter Gordon, once we went on, he never forgave him for two things, what he said about Louis Armstrong and what he said about Sarah Vaughan, because she was finished, right? So he remembered that. And when we were on the jazz cruise, people get off, you know, the cruise stops and everybody gets off, but Dexter stayed on because then you have the pool. But Leonard Feathers stayed on, was in the pool. I went off the ship with Dizzy Gillespie, I'm bragging, you know. But he told me when I got back, he said, you know, it was just the two of us in the pool. And I said to him, it's very brave of you to get in the pool with me because I could hold you underwater. And so he said, Leonard Feather laughed, and he said, oh, you wouldn't do that. He said, I remember what you said about Louis Armstrong.
Wow.
And he, you know, I should have told you this before, but and he said, you know, you didn't apologize for being not only wrong, but people believe what you said when you don't know what you're talking about. And then Dexter was very happy about that because look how many, that was 1988.
Wow.
Look how many years he waited
to
say something about that. But that's the other thing about your book is there's the revenge factor in your book. However, you do it in a very kind way. You know, you don't attack the people, the critics. I mean, you quote Miles when he said something positive, and in the end about, you know, Dizzy and he being, you know, that cut, the YouTube cut when they're doing
Umbrella Man.
You know, you don't have to say anything besides that.
You sent me recently an interview with Archie Shepp, and I thought it was so beautiful because Archie Shepp says that Louis was the only black person they used to see in the movies back then. And I think that's so fascinating because he loved making those movies. He loved doing comedy. He knew he was a natural comedian. And sure, you know, we look at some of those parts today and we wince and we wish he could have been better showcased. But people don't realize how big it was to have him in those movies. And it's mostly the white critics of today who, you know, write the harshest words, but how could he make that choice? How could he do that so demeaning? Oh, yeah, what a mistake. And it's like, you know, I spent most of my research going through the black press in the 1930s and 40s. And that's when I really realized that they were with him every step of the way and they knew what he was accomplishing. And I think that's the main story that I realized that wasn't told because it seemed like previous biographies on Armstrong thought he lost the black audience in 1929. It was like once he started recording pop music, that's it. You know, he lost it. It's like no. It's the jazz critics. You know, Downbeat in the mid 30s, they were hammering him for the worst sounding band, and Louis is playing nothing but commercial junk.
Right.
And then once he gets to the 40s. You know, everybody in their camp. So, Leonard Feather's in one camp and, you know, George Simon's in another camp. And, everybody's just fighting with each other. What's the real jazz? It needs to be like this. It needs to have that. And, Louis is paying them no attention. But, eventually it becomes this all-out war, bop versus traditional. And it was bad for the music. And I think the musicians had more in common than anybody ever gave them credit for. But it was the critics, mostly the white critics, who drove these divisions. And I think those divisions, that's what hurt Armstrong and what still hurts him to this day, why he's not really taken seriously by many, jazz educators and critics, writers, musicians, people who might know West End blues but never checked them out. The reason they never checked them out is because of this discourse in the 1940s that I think really did tarnish him.
The way you approach it with his words from the tape. So could you talk about your process using the home tapes?
Yeah, no, that's my whole, that's what gets me out of bed in the morning is, I don't presume to think I know what Louis Armstrong's thoughts were 100% of the day. But I know the tapes, I know his writings, I know his manuscripts, everything he left behind. And I feel like this book and even my previous book, my whole thing is trying to give him a platform because he made these tapes knowing that one day future historians were going to find his life interesting. He wanted to be in control of his own story. And I feel like for years after he died, a lot of the early biographers, James Lincoln Collier and people like Gunther Schuller, they didn't have access to this stuff. And so they just tried psychoanalyzing, he failed his talent. He made a choice to go commercial. He was craving applause because he needed a father. And, they're always trying to come up with something. And you listen to the tapes, and like I said, there he is bragging about these movie appearances that people have been wringing their hands over. There he is, talking about how much he loves playing with the big band when people thought that he was shackled to the big band, that he wanted to go back to the Hot Five. There he is hiring, Kenny Clark and Mingus and Dexter Gordon when people thought, he didn't like modern jazz. And so it's all there on these tapes. If you listen to him talk about music, talk about race, talk about, even Joe Glazer is a major character, Louis's feelings on him, his feelings on his wives, all that stuff, as often as I could, I try to lean on him. You can still disagree with him. You could still watch those 1930s movies and say, well, Louis Armstrong, you made the wrong choice. But at least now you'll know how he felt. And I think that that's all that he would have wanted, is for people to at least give him a seat at the table. It's his story. So let him at least explain what he was trying to get through with his music and who he was trying to reach in his audience and how he felt about critics and how he felt about race. And so, I have my opinions, but I always try to defer to him and defer to the other musicians. And like I mentioned, also the black press was very important for me. When I've read every book on Louis Armstrong. Yeah, that's not a surprise. But when I started really researching this, I avoided them like the plague. In the last 3 years, I don't think I picked up a book on Louis. Yeah, and there are ones I like, Terry Teachout, Gary Giddens, other ones. I just left them all on the shelf, and I said, I want to do this using Louis's words and using the contemporary coverage, the jazz press, the black press. How was he covered? How did it go? How did views change on him? What did he tell the press? And so I think that, the amount of, firsthand material that I was able to draw upon, I think that's what sets this book apart. A lot of Armstrong fans know the bullet points. They know the big band. They know he has chops troubles. They know he breaks up the big band, forms a small group. Okay, but how was it perceived? How did black audiences treat him? How did jazz critics treat him? How did he feel about the world? And so, that's where I always err on the side of Louis Armstrong. Quote him and let him take it from there.
So the relationships, the way you talk about them, would you explain to me about, do you say Zudi Singleton? How do you
Zudi, yeah.
Zudi Singleton. Explain what happened. What is that?
Yeah, Zudi was like a brother to Louis. They grew up in New Orleans together. Louis refused to leave New Orleans without Zudi at first. Fletcher Henderson wanted Louis in the early 20s, and Louis said, only if you take me and my drummer. And Henderson didn't need a drummer, so Louis stayed. Then they made all those great recordings together in 28. They played in Chicago. They came to New York. They tore up the city. But then the band at Connie's Inn was not held over. They were basically fired in December of 1929. They were bringing a new band led by Allie Ross, and Allie Ross went to Zudi Singleton and said, hey, you want to be my drummer? And Louis at this time didn't have any concrete plans. He didn't know where he was going to go next. And so Zudi went to him and said, all right, I'm going to join Allie Ross's band. And at first, Louis kind of was like, all right, well, friendship's one thing, business is another, and whatever. But as the years went on, it really kind of burned Armstrong. He thought it was disloyal. He thought the two of them had gone through so much together, and they get fired. And one night later, Zudi's in the same venue with a new band. Louis he could hold a grudge. And those two main figures, Zudi and his second wife, Lil, they get him to this point. And Lil, I've always said, is like the architect of his career. But he kind of turns on both of them later on. Zudi and him have a falling out. Finally, in the 50s, Zudi tries sitting in with the band, tries getting the gig with the All-Stars, and Louis tells Joe Glazer, I will never play with him again. And then he has a falling out with Lil, because she was always, even long after their marriage, she was still correcting his grammar and giving him advice, and still thought that she was, in charge. And so he snapped at her, and they didn't talk for about 10 years. And so there's this kind of relationship that goes throughout the book. And, the epilogue, though, is about when mortality was facing them all directly in the eye. They all, buried the hatchet. And it's kind of beautiful. The last couple of years of Louis's life, he reunites with Zudi, he reunites with Lil. But those are just two of the figures. I loved leaning on the oral histories of, like you mentioned, the musicians that were in the band, guys like Charlie Holmes and, Pops Foster, and all these people who, they were there night after night. They're all gone. I mean, the members of Louis's orchestra, there's nobody left for me to interview, which was kind of sad. But I spent so much time at the Institute of Jazz Studies, the Jazz Oral History Project they did with the Smithsonian, all those interviews Milt Hinton did and everything else. And it was great just to let them speak, these musicians who were there to get their perspective, and guys like Pete Clark and people that no one really knows anymore, Albert Nicholas and stuff like that. They're there every night. They're hearing Louis every night. They're on the road. They know their arrangements. Let's hear from them. I can put my 21st century lens and think I know what it was all about. But these guys are there. So as often as possible, Louis first, of course, as I mentioned, but the book is peppered with these stories. Zudi and Lil, and like I mentioned, Charlie Holmes and Jack Teagar, and all these musicians keep coming back throughout the narrative because I want to tell their stories too.
But that's what sets your book apart from many others, not all others, but many others, is the way you let the musicians speak, where Louis, I wanted to ask you about Louis. What do you think he was thinking when he kept everything? When he made the tapes. They made the beautiful collages on the box, tape box, which is like art. I mean, not like art, it's art. The way he had the tape recorders, and then what did he have, a typewriter on the road? Because Dexter said that's where he learned to write letters. He had like a little portable typewriter.
He had a portable typewriter in the 40s, 30s and 40s, and then by the 50s he had the portable tape recorder. And so the scrapbooks, I quote a lot from the articles that only survive in the scrapbooks. They go back to 1925. And so his whole career is about this documentation. He's an archivist. There's no way around it.
That's right.
And so I get asked all the time, why? And the two stories I love to tell, the one story in 1961, he makes a tape where he gets in a fight with his wife, Lucille, and they are going at it. And she doesn't know he's recording it. And when she finds out, she tells him to turn off the tape recorder and erase it. And he says, no, that's for posterity. And so that's answer one. And then Trummy Young's daughter, Andrea Young, she visited the archives a couple of years ago and told me that anytime Louis stayed in Chicago, once word got out where he was staying, you know, a bread line would form around the block, people waiting for him to get out of the elevator, and they would hit him up with hard luck stories and, hey, can you lay some money on me? And he would walk up and down the lobby giving out 10s, 20s, 50s, 100s. And word would get back to Joe Glazer, and Joe Glazer would call him up and scream at him, you know, what are you doing? You're giving all your money away. And Louis would say, what do I need money for? They're going to write about me in the history book someday. And I think those two stories right there, he is obsessed with telling his own story. He wants to be in control. He wasn't a dumb man. He read the critics. He read these profiles. He knew where everybody stood and what they were saying about him. And this was going to be his way to counter it. So, you know, if he encounters racism, or, you know, if he's getting high, or if he's fighting with his manager or whatever, he can tell those stories. He can type them. He can write them down. He can read them into his tape recorder, or talk with friends in front of a recording device. And, you know, he might not go on Ed Sullivan or Johnny Carson and tell these stories, but he's making sure they're there. And right before he died, he told his wife, Lucille, don't do anything with the tapes. Don't sell the tapes. Don't throw out the tapes. The tapes are very important. So there's a part of him, we all know he's humble and down home, and all that's true, but he also knows that he changed the shape of American pop music. He overcame poverty, he dealt with racism, and he knew that one day his story was going to be in the history books, like he said. Why not go to the source? You know, why not go right to him instead of reading what other people say about him or all that stuff? This was his gift to us. I was born 9 years after he died, and the fact that I have spent almost 25 years of my 40-year life, you know, listening to his words and reading his words, you know, I think he did it for people like me, you know.
We can look at Louis Armstrong and the pictures he picked in the book. So killer.
Thank you.
Oh, great, the one where he's eating and everything. Yeah. I love that because, you know, you know, I don't want to dwell too much on his critics, because you know how I feel about his critics. But remember the one that said, oh no, we can't, we're going to get rid of all the smiling photos.
Yeah.
That, it's what Dizzy and other people say in your book. He was real. Louis Armstrong was who he was. He knew who he was. He knew what he meant. And that in that other video with Umbrella Man with he and Dizzy,
yeah,
you know, Dizzy is totally Louis Armstrong.
Oh yeah.
I mean, the scatting, the humor, you know, and that, you know, I mean, the way they look at each other. And the other video with Mahalia Jackson.
Oh.
You got two wigs and one of them goes yeah. The humanity, the honesty, is what Dexter Gordon said, because, you know, thank you for quoting my book.
Of course.
But what Dexter said, if anybody even implied something negative about Louis Armstrong, Dexter stood up and said, you're a tall man. So, you know, big, tall guys know they can hurt somebody, so they're usually more gentle. You know, like if you throw your arm back on somebody and they fall down, they're going to hit their head, you go to jail, right? So you're gentle, right? You try. You don't try not to. So Dexter, if somebody said something where he really was angry, he stood up, and he was 6'6". Anybody implied something negative about Louis Armstrong, he stood up. And then he would say, you know, before you say another word, you should know what you're talking about.
Beautiful.
If you think you're a jazz musician, and if there wasn't a Louis Armstrong, there'd be no such thing. So think it through before you say something. And they'd be like, okay, Dex, you know, and they got down because, I mean, he got that look. And
Right. Oh, I can imagine.
You know, but you know, I feel like you do that with the book. You, in your gentle giant way. How tall are you?
6'3".
Oh, sure. You're a short guy. But in your personality that I've observed over the years, you have the way of representing him that's so honest, like he was. You know, you don't try to impose our ideas now on what it was, or that thing with the fake psychology. Oh, he was an orphan, and you know.
Right.
You know. So what are you going to do next? What's your next book, honey?
I don't have anything officially signed yet, but I feel like I have a giant gaping hole now, and I need to finish the story. I need to do 1901 to 1928, and then I'll have 3 books on the 3 periods, and that'll be it. I always wanted to avoid it because I felt like he wrote the definitive book about the New Orleans years, you know, Satchmo, My Life in New Orleans. But even then, you know, he has some lapses in memory and some contradictions. So I love playing detective. So I would love to take a stab at that. And then the 1920s, I do think I have a slightly different take. You know, I've never said anything negative about the Hot Fives and Hot Sevens, but there was always that thought that represented the serious, you know, artiste Louis Armstrong. And in that period, though, you know, he's doing comedy every night on stage, and listen to all those recordings. He's playing slide whistle. He's doing comedy sketches. He's doing novelty vocals. And so I feel like there's a consistency in his career, that the whole thing of showmanship and comedy and incredible improvisations and swing and pop songs. And it's a big mix, and it's there. It's there in the 1920s. It's there in the 1960s. And so I would kind of like to, again, I mean, I would love to analyze stuff like West End Blues and Cornet Chop Suey. I mean, that's the height. But I would also like to back it up a little bit and show, you know, his influences, you know, him going to see Bill Bojangles Robinson and him doing preacher routines and, you know, what else, listening to Guy Lombardo in Chicago and all that stuff.
Guy Lombardo influence, so interesting how, you know, so many musicians thought that was like the height because the charts and players, and that was fascinating. Right.
Yeah, he was the king of the Harlem jukeboxes in the late 20s. I mean, and you know, it's kind of a joke now, but he had an identifiable sound, and everybody loves melody, and everybody loves, you know, sentimental music and love songs and weepy things. And so, you know, his style, you know, Louis ate that up, and I think the genius of Armstrong is using that style as a backdrop and then showing what can be done on top of it. So, you know, recording the same repertoire as Lombardo, doing things like, you know, Sweethearts on Parade and You're Driving Me Crazy, but, you know, singing them in his own fashion and then picking up the trumpet and playing these improvisations that have never been equaled. That's, to me, the genius. You know, it's kind of taking that sound and it's like, look, it's a canvas, you know, look what you can do by being yourself, being original, being, you know, a genius. And I think that's why we're where we are today. You know, not many people know Guy Lombardo, but everybody knows Louis Armstrong.
True. And the other thing is so interesting about his singing, you know, you don't separate in the book what is so great. You don't separate his showmanship, his singing, and his playing from each other. You know,
yeah.
Invents scat singing, and so we just, you know, that's early. He's scatting early.
Yeah.
Early.
And all the trends, you know, I found fascinating articles in the early 30s talking about how scat singing was taken over, crooning was taken over, and they all mentioned Louis Armstrong and, you know, and his influence on Bing Crosby and Billie Holiday and anybody who's ever tried to sing this music. You know, they have to touch on Armstrong because that's still that's still the way to do it. And so to me, it's the total package. You know, you can like one aspect more than other. You can like the trumpet playing more than the singing or whatever. But to really kind of wrap your head around one man who is playing the trumpet like that, who is singing like that, who has incredible rhythmic mastery, who can tell a story, and is funny. And some people, you know, comedians might say that the humor aspect is the most difficult part. I mean, to be able to land a punchline and have the timing to tell a joke or tell a story, or singing some of these songs, Laughing Louie and all these things, which can make you laugh out loud. And I spend a lot of time on comedy because his comedy was honed in front of Black audiences, especially the Apollo loved him. Burt Williams was his first hero. Bojangles Robinson was his biggest influence. His best friends till the end of his life, Red Fox and Moms Mabley and Timmy Rogers and all that stuff. So the people, again, who shy away from it, and so they say, well, the jokes and the bawdy humor and that was just diffuse white tension and do some stuff to make white people happy. It's like, no, that's a Black tradition, and he was unapologetically Black every time he did that. All right, we're out of time, but I just want to thank you again, Maxine, for taking the time. Again, I really wish we were in New Orleans doing this right now, that we could have a break and get some food and hear some music. But we'll have to wait until next year. But thank you again, and I'm so glad you enjoyed the book. Again, the name is Heart Full of Rhythm. The big band years of Louis Armstrong, and please check out Maxine's Sophisticated Giant about Dexter Gordon, which is just sensational. And Maxine, any last words for our New Orleans
the name of your the book is published by
Oxford University Press.
And it's available when? Is it available?
September 1st is the official release date, but it might start showing up a little earlier than that. So keep watching out.
And my final word is what you say in the epilogue. I can't give you anything but love, baby.
The feeling,
love you, Ricky.
Love you, Maxine. The feeling's more than mutual. And thanks everyone for watching. And we'll see you again next August.